On the distant world of Trillion 5, the air shimmered with heat, and the sky stretched in brilliant shades of purple and gold. The planet had long been the home of the Zernok, a proud and ancient species of large, reptilian creatures. For centuries, the Zernok had ruled the galaxy with their strength, intelligence, and unyielding resolve. Their empire was vast, and their traditions sacred. But today, the planet was alive with excitement. It was the day of the Albino Hatchlings' birth, an event that only occurred once every few centuries. The Albino Hatchlings were the rarest of their kind, born under the light of the Azure Comet, which passed by Trillion 5 once every 100 years. Their birth was a symbol of divine favor, and the entire empire celebrated with festivals, songs, and grand ceremonies. In the heart of the Empress's royal palace, Zera, the ruling empress of the Zernok, stood before the sacred hatching chambers, her eyes fixed on the transparent dome. Inside, her hatchlings were breaking free from their shells, their soft, delicate skin shining white under the light of the comet. Zera's heart swelled with pride. Her species was known for their strength, their harsh, almost cold demeanor. But the albino hatchlings were different. They were not only an extension of her rule, they were the future of the empire. They would grow to be fierce warriors, wise leaders, and powerful figures, just like her. She had no doubt that her children would follow the traditional ways and serve the empire with loyalty and strength. But what Zera did not expect, what she could not have predicted, was the strange behavior of her new hatchlings. As the newborns took their first wobbly steps on the cool palace floor, a strange thing began to happen. The hatchlings, those symbols of her strength, looked past her and toward the figure sitting quietly in the corner of the room. It was a small human child. Her name was Kara. Kara had been brought to the palace as part of a cultural exchange between the humans of Terra Prime and the Zernok. She was a child of only 7 years, but there was something about her quiet strength that even Zera had noticed the moment she met her. Zera watched as her precious hatchlings, instead of crawling toward her, as was expected, slowly made their way toward Kara. Their tiny claws clicked gently on the floor as they moved, their white scales glistening in the dim light. Kara, unaware of the significance of this moment, smiled brightly and reached out her hand to them. The hatchlings nuzzled her, pressing their soft, scaled bodies against her small frame. Kara giggled, not in fear, but in pure delight. She petted them gently, whispering words of comfort and joy. The Empress stood frozen, her eyes wide with disbelief. This was impossible. The hatchlings should be bonding with her, not with this small human child. The Zernok Code had long emphasized that their species was to be strong, independent, and never to show weakness or affection toward other species. To see the hatchlings, the future of her empire, showing more interest in the human child than in her, was a blow to Zera's pride. Her sharp claws clenched at her sides, but she said nothing. The ceremony was important, and she could not allow her emotions to show in front of her people. Yet, a sense of unease gnawed at her chest. As the hours passed, the hatchlings continued to grow closer to Kara. They would follow her around the palace, their large, luminous eyes always trained on her. The human child, gentle and kind, spoke to them in a soft voice, coaxing them to play with her and teaching them new things. At one point, Zera noticed that the hatchlings had begun to mimic Kara. They would curl around her feet, coiling their long, reptilian bodies in patterns, as if learning something new. There was an undeniable bond forming, one that Zera could not ignore. "I must speak to the royal advisors," Zera muttered under her breath. The situation had escalated beyond her control. What was happening with her hatchlings? Soon, the royal advisors arrived, their voices a low murmur of concern. The High Counselor, an elder named Thyrax, was the first to speak. "Empress," he said with a bow, "we have noticed the unusual behavior of the hatchlings. It is troubling." Zera turned to him, her eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" "They are bonding with the human child." Thyrax's eyes flickered. "Yes, Empress. This has never happened before. The bond between a Zernok and another species is unnatural. It could be seen as a sign of weakness. There are those in the Empire who may view this as a threat to your rule." Zera's jaw tightened. She had always been the symbol of strength for her people and unshakable leader. But now, she was unsure. Could this human child, with her innocence and strange connection to the hatchlings, really threaten everything she had built? Then we must break the bond, Zara said firmly. Remove the child. The hatchlings must focus on their true path. The advisors hesitated. But, Empress, the hatchlings, they seem to be growing in ways we have not seen before. Their intelligence, their abilities, they are developing faster than we anticipated. The human child may be the key to their future. The words struck Zara like a blow. The hatchlings had always been seen as a symbol of her reign. If they grew more intelligent and powerful because of their bond with Kara, then she could not afford to ignore what this meant. Could the bond be something more than weakness? Could it be the key to a new future? Zara was torn. She had spent her life building her empire, upholding traditions, but now, the future of the Zernok seemed uncertain. She needed answers. She needed time. But for now, all she could do was watch as the hatchlings continued to follow Kara, their eyes full of trust and affection. The Empress's heart pounded. What would happen next? The days following the hatchlings' bond with Kara were filled with confusion, uncertainty, and growing tension. Empress Zara spent her time pacing the corridors of her grand palace, her mind racing. The decision to let Kara remain near her hatchlings weighed heavily on her. Despite the whispers from her advisors, Zara knew there was something special about the way the hatchlings responded to the human child. Kara, unaware of the growing political tension around her, continued to spend time with the hatchlings, who had now grown more curious and playful. They followed her everywhere, even into the royal gardens, where Kara would sit and talk to them in a soft voice. The hatchlings, once cold-blooded and distant, seemed to be changing, becoming more affectionate, more curious, and more intelligent with each passing day. It was strange, even for the Empress. The hatchlings, who were supposed to be the future warriors of the Zernok Empire, were now showing signs of softest emotions that were not supposed to exist in their species. It was as if Kara's presence was unlocking something in them, something beyond the strict training and traditions they were meant to follow. Zara had always been a fierce leader, known for her wisdom and unyielding control. But now, as she watched the hatchlings interact with Kara, she began to question everything. Was this the future of the Zernok? A future where emotions and connections with other species could change the course of their empire? Or was this a dangerous flaw that needed to be eliminated before it could spread? The Empress decided to meet with her royal advisors again, hoping for guidance. Thyrax, the High Counselor, was already waiting for her in the palace's grand hall. His face was grave, and his eyes carried the weight of concern. Empress, he began, bowing low. It is becoming clear that the hatchlings are becoming more attached to the human child. This cannot be allowed to continue. Zara folded her arms, her sharp claws clicking together. What do you propose, Thyrax? Shall I simply remove the child? Send her back to her human colony? Thyrax shook his head. That would be the easy solution, Empress. But I fear the consequences may be far-reaching. The hatchlings, they are changing. They are learning from the human child in ways we cannot understand. We do not know what will happen if we break this bond. Zara paused, her mind racing. She had always valued the wisdom of her advisors, but in this case, they seemed just as lost as she was. The idea that the hatchlings might be growing in intelligence and emotion because of their bond with Kara was both exciting and terrifying. It was something that had never been seen before in the history of the Zarnoke. Perhaps we need more time to observe them, Zara suggested, her voice thoughtful. Maybe this connection isn't as dangerous as it seems. Perhaps it is something we can learn from, not fight against. But Thyrax was not convinced. Empress, we cannot afford to be weak. The Zernok Code teaches us that we are superior to all other species. We cannot allow our future rulers to be so influenced by a human child. The Empire may see this as a threat to your leadership. Zara knew that the Council's concerns were valid. The Zernok Code had been in place for thousands of years, and the idea of a Zernok leader being influenced by an alien species was unthinkable to many. The Empire had always prided itself on its strength and independence. To go against those traditions now could mean the downfall of everything Zara had worked for, yet the Empress couldn't ignore what she had seen with her own eyes. The hatchlings had begun to show more than just affection for Kara. They had started mimicking her actions. They would sit with her for hours, watching as she played with toys or read books. They even learned to respond to her voice, their movements more graceful and deliberate with each passing day. Kara, in turn, seemed to adore the hatchlings. She treated them with kindness, as though they were her own companions, rather than the future rulers of an empire. It was clear that she saw them as more than just strange creatures. She saw them as friends, and in return, the hatchlings had begun to trust her in a way they had never trusted anyone before. Zara spent the next several days observing Kara and the hatchlings in secret. She watched them play in the royal gardens, watched as Kara taught them simple words and gestures. The hatchlings, in turn, began to respond with surprising intelligence. It wasn't just their affection for Kara that was growing, it was their ability to understand her, to learn from her. It was almost as if the hatchlings were evolving, unlocking new parts of their minds that had previously been dormant. And the more time they spent with Kara, the more they seemed to grow. Their movements became more fluid, more coordinated, and they began to display intelligence far beyond what was expected for their age. One day, Zara decided to confront Kara directly. She found her in the palace gardens, sitting beneath a large tree, with the hatchlings curled around her feet, listening to her speak. Kara looked up as Zara approached, her eyes filled with innocence and curiosity. Empress. Kara greeted, smiling brightly. Look, they're learning how to sit still like me. Zara's heart fluttered. She had never seen the hatchlings behave so calmly before. Normally, they were full of energy, darting around the palace in an almost chaotic manner. But now, they were calm, sitting perfectly still as Kara spoke to them. I see, Zara said slowly, her voice soft. You have a special gift, Kara? Kara beamed. I think they just like spending time with me. Zara was silent for a moment, contemplating what Kara had said. Could it really be that simple? Could the hatchlings be learning not from their strict training, but from their bond with Kara? Was this a new kind of intelligence? A new way forward for the Zernag? Zara sighed deeply, her heart heavy with the weight of her decision. She could feel the pull of tradition, the need to maintain control. But there was something in the way the hatchlings responded to Kara that made her question everything. Perhaps the future was not as simple as following the old ways. Maybe the future lay in embracing something new, something that had never been seen before. For now, she had no answers. But one thing was certain, the bond between Kara and the hatchlings was changing everything, and Zara would have to decide if she was willing to change with it. The days turned into weeks, and the bond between Kara and the albino hatchlings only deepened. Empress Zara watched from a distance, torn between her pride as the ruler of the Zernok and the strange, almost magical changes happening in her hatchlings. She had never imagined that such a bond with a human child could result in anything more than distraction. But the hatchlings were growing in ways she could not explain. The royal advisors continued to press her, urging her to act before the situation became more complicated. Thyrax, the High Counselor, was especially persistent. Empress, he said one morning, his voice heavy with concern, we have observed the hatchlings for weeks now. Their intelligence, it grows with every passing day. They are no longer behaving as typical Zernok hatchlings. Their actions are unpredictable, and more troubling still, they grow more attached to Kara with each moment. Zara stood by the grand windows of her palace, staring out over the vast landscape of Trillion 5. The once pristine world now felt foreign to her. The Zernok code, which had guided her people for centuries, felt like a distant memory. The empire was built on strength, control, and unwavering tradition. And now it was changing. I know, she said softly, her voice distant. I see it too, Thyrax. But what am I supposed to do? If I take Kara away from the hatchlings, what will that do to them? Will they revert to what they were before, or will they be lost forever? Thyrax looked pained. You know as well as I do, Empress, that the Zernok cannot afford to be weak. If this bond between the hatchlings and the human child continues, it could be seen as a sign of weakness to the entire empire. The people may question your leadership. Zera's eyes narrowed. You think they would betray me over this? Over a bond they do not understand? Thyrax did not meet her gaze. It is not betrayal, Empress. It is fear. Fear of the unknown. If the hatchlings grow more like this human child soft, emotional, it may weaken the Zernok in the eyes of other species. And there are those who would see this as an opportunity to take your throne. The words stung. But Zera couldn't deny the truth in them. The conservative factions of the Zernok, those who held tightly to tradition, would never accept a future where emotion and kindness had any place. To them, the idea that the future rulers of the empire could be so deeply affected by a human child was dangerous. They saw the hatchlings' bond with Kara as a threat, a direct challenge to everything the Zernok had built. Zera paced across the room, her sharp claws clicking on the cold floor. She needed a solution. She could not afford to lose control of her empire. The people needed to see her as strong, as their protector. But every time she thought about taking Kara away, she felt something stir in her heart. The hatchlings, they needed this. They needed her guidance, but they also needed something more. Something she had never been able to provide. Kara has done something unusual, Zera said quietly, more to herself than to Thyrax. She has awakened something in them. A new way of thinking. A new kind of power. Thyrax frowned. Power? What do you mean, Empress? The hatchlings. They are not like other Zernok. They are learning things they should not know. They are becoming more aware of the world around them. More curious. More alive. Thyrax's eyes widened, his voice filled with caution. Empress, this could be dangerous. The Zernok code does not allow for such behavior. If the hatchlings show weakness, it will be your leadership that will be questioned. If they are seen as soft, the entire empire will fall. Zera turned sharply, her eyes locking with his. Then I will be the one to decide if they are weak or not. Thyrax bowed his head in silence. But Zera could feel the weight of his doubt. The rest of the advisors, too, were growing increasingly uneasy. The once in question rule of the Empress was now under threat. And it wasn't just from the outside. There were whispers within the palace, too. One afternoon, as Zera walked through the palace gardens, she found herself face to face with General Krath, a powerful and ambitious leader within the Zernok military. He had always been a loyal supporter of the Empress, but lately, his eyes had begun to look at her with something else, something colder. More calculating. Empress, he said with a bow. I wish to speak with you about the future of the empire. There are concerns regarding the hatchlings. Zera raised an eyebrow. Concerns? The hatchlings, he continued, are being influenced by the human child. This affection they show toward her is not the behavior we need from our future leaders. If they continue down this path, I fear it will damage the reputation of the Zarnoke. It will be a weakness that our enemies will exploit. Zera's heart skipped a beat. General Krath had always been loyal, but there was something in his words that made her uneasy. It wasn't just a concern for the empire, it was a demand for control. A demand for things to return to the old ways. A demand for strength above all else. What would you suggest? She asked, her voice calm but laced with a quiet warning. Krath's eyes glinted. Remove the child! End this foolishness before it spreads further. The hatchlings will return to their true purpose, and the empire will remain strong. Without this distraction, you will remain in control. Zera felt a flash of anger, but she swallowed it down. She knew what Krath wanted. He wanted power. He wanted control over the future of the empire, and if the hatchlings remained loyal to Kara, he would have no way to manipulate them. He feared their bond with the human child because it was something he couldn't control. The tension in the room was thick as Zera stared at him, weighing her options. Krath was right about one thing: her leadership was being questioned. The bond between Kara and the hatchlings had shaken the very foundation of everything the empire stood for, but she would not be so easily swayed. I will consider your words, General, Zera said quietly. But understand this, the future of the Zernok is not just about strength. It is about growth, and sometimes that growth comes in unexpected forms. Kraft's face tightened. But he bowed low. As you wish, Empress. But remember, the Empire will only survive if you remain strong. As Kraft left, Zara was left alone in the garden, the weight of his words pressing on her chest. She knew she had to make a decision soon. The Empire, her people, and her hatchlings all depended on it. The future was uncertain, and every choice she made from here on out would shape the fate of her world. The days felt longer to Empress Zara as the pressure continued to build around her. Every step she took within the palace, every glance from her advisors, and every murmur of the royal council seemed to weigh heavier on her shoulders. It was as though her entire world was teetering on the edge of a decision she wasn't ready to make. The bond between Kara and the albino hatchlings had not weakened. In fact, it had only grown stronger. The hatchlings, once small and wobbly, had grown into creatures of grace and intelligence. They moved with purpose now, and their eyes glowed with understanding as they listened to Kara's every word. There was no doubt that they had changed. The Empress couldn't deny it any longer. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door of her private chamber. It was Thyrax, the High Counselor, who had been her most trusted advisor for many years, Empress. He said as he entered, bowing respectfully, "The council requests your presence. They have matters they wish to discuss with you." Zara stood from her seat, her fingers brushing against the smooth surface of her desk. She had been reviewing her options, weighing every possible outcome, but she still didn't know what was the right choice. The pressure to conform to the old ways was suffocating, yet she could not ignore the changes she had seen in the hatchlings. Were they really weaker for it, or had they simply found a new way of being strong? "I will come," Zara replied, her voice steady, but carrying a quiet undercurrent of uncertainty. The walk to the council chambers felt long, as though the very walls of the palace were closing in on her. As she entered the room, she saw familiar faces, her trusted advisors, warriors, and officials. But among them stood General Kraft, the ambitious military leader who had grown increasingly vocal about the growing influence of the human child. "You called for me?" Zara asked, her gaze sweeping across the room. The royal council stood in silence, the weight of the moment pressing down on them. Finally, Thyrax stepped forward, his expression serious. "Empress, we have discussed your recent actions. The bond between the hatchlings and Kara is unlike anything we have seen before. The people are growing restless. There are whispers that the future of the Empire may be at risk." Zara's jaw tightened. She knew what they were implying. Her decisions, her reluctance to remove Kara from the palace, were not just seen as mistakes, they were seen as weaknesses. "Should I remove the child from the palace?" Zara asked, her voice calm. But there was a sharpness to it that even the council could not ignore. A hush fell over the room. General Kraft was the first to speak, his voice cold and calculated. "Empress, we have always adhered to the Zernok Code, strength above all. The bond you have allowed between the hatchlings and Kara is a mistake. It shows weakness. Our enemies will seize upon this, and soon our empire will crumble." The words stung, but Zara held her ground. The code had always dictated that the Zernok remain untouchable, emotionless, and powerful. But as she looked across the room, she saw only fear of change. They wanted her to act out of fear, not wisdom. "Perhaps the code has served us well in the past," she said slowly, her eyes meeting each of their gazes. "But what if there is a new way to build strength? What if the future of the Empire lies in something more than just power?" General Kraft's eyes flared with anger. "This is not the time for questions, Empress. You must act swiftly before it is too late." Zara turned her back to the council, her mind racing. It was as though every decision she made carried the weight of her empire, and the future of the Zernok was slipping through her fingers. Her thoughts turned back to the hatchlings. She remembered their soft, trusting eyes as they curled around Kara. They had learned so much from the human child: how to play, how to care, how to communicate without fear. They were growing into something different, something beyond what was expected of them. But what did that mean for the Empire? Could a softer path truly lead to strength? She thought of Kara, the small human child who had captured the hearts of the hatchlings. Kara had no power, no title, She was simply a child who had shown the hatchlings something that none of their teachers had been able to: affection, trust, compassion. Zara's heart felt heavy with doubt. Could she ignore the truth of what she had witnessed? Could she turn away from the new path that had revealed itself simply because it was unfamiliar? She remembered Kara's gentle laugh, her patience, and the way she had cared for the hatchlings without any expectation. In that moment, Zara knew something had changed in her too. "General Kraft," Zara finally said, her voice low and firm, "you asked me to remove the child to save the Empire. But what if the child is the very thing that will save us?" A shocked silence filled the room. Even Kraft, who was known for his fiery temper, seemed taken aback. Zara turned to face the council, her eyes steady. "The bond between Kara and the hatchlings is unlike anything we've seen. It is not a weakness. It is a strength. It is the future. But, Empress," Kraft began, his voice rising in frustration, "the people, enough." Zara's voice rang out, cutting him off. Her sharp gaze swept over the room, and for the first time, she felt a spark of something she hadn't felt in a long time: resolve. "The future of the Zernok will not be dictated by fear or the past. I will not turn my back on what I know is right. The hatchlings will grow and lead us into a new era, one of strength through unity, not division." General Kraft opened his mouth to argue, but stopped himself, clearly struggling with the Empress's words. He could not deny that Zara's authority had been absolute until now. Her decision was final. "I will not remove Kara," Zara said, her voice unwavering. "If this bond between her and the hatchlings brings a new way of strength, then I will embrace it." The council members exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of what to say next. Some of them seemed relieved, while others were clearly disappointed. The change was happening. They could feel it, but they didn't know if it was the right change. Zara's heart was heavy, but she knew she had made the only choice she could. The future of the Zernok Empire rested on her shoulders, and now she was willing to risk everything for a chance at something new. With a final glance at her council, she turned and left the chamber, her mind made up. The path forward would not be easy, but she was ready to face whatever came next. The future had been set in motion. The sun had set over Trillion 5, casting long shadows across the royal palace. Empress Zara stood by the grand windows of her chamber, looking out at the vast expanse of her empire. The stars twinkled in the sky, and the distant hum of the palace's machinery was a reminder of how far the Zernok had come. But now, everything was about to change. The decision she had made was final. There would be no turning back. Kara was still in the palace, as was the bond between her and the Albino Hatchlings. Despite the concerns of her advisors and the whispers of discontent among the people, Zara had chosen a different path. She would not remove Kara from the Hatchlings' lives. If the future of the Zernok Empire lay in a new way of thinking, one that embraced emotions and compassion, then so be it. But the path ahead was not without challenges. The royal advisors had warned her that if the bond between Kara and the hatchlings continued to grow, the empire would be seen as weak. The old way the Zernok code emphasized control, strength, and emotional distance. The new path, however, felt like a rebellion, a shift that was difficult to accept for many of her people. They had followed the code for centuries. How could they suddenly accept a future where the hatchlings might be led by a human child? Zara knew there would be opposition. General Kraft had already voiced his concerns loudly and often. He was powerful, respected, and loyal, but he could not see past his own beliefs. To him, the idea of a future where emotions ruled instead of strict authority was unthinkable. But for Zara, the future of the Zernok was about more than just following the old ways. It was about growth, change, and embracing something new. One morning, Zara gathered her closest allies in the royal council room. The atmosphere was heavy, filled with uncertainty and anticipation. Thyrax, the High Counselor, was there, standing silently by her side. The royal council members, most of whom had supported the Empress until now, looked tense, unsure of what to expect. When Zara spoke, her voice was calm but firm. "We are standing at a crossroads, one that will determine the future of our empire. The old ways have served us, but we cannot ignore what is happening before our eyes. She paused, meeting the gaze of each council member. The albino hatchlings are not like us. They are not bound by the same rules, the same constraints. They are learning from Kara in ways we never imagined. Their intelligence, their empathy, and their abilities are growing beyond what we believed possible. And I believe that is a gift, not a threat. General Kraft spoke up, his tone sharp. Empress, you are blind to the consequences of your actions. The hatchlings will be seen as weak, and you will be seen as weak. The Empire needs strength, not emotional bonds. Zera's gaze never wavered. Strength is not only in power, craft, it is in the ability to grow, to adapt, and to lead in new ways. The Zernok have been alone at the top for too long. We must learn to work with others, not just dominate them. The room was silent, save for the soft hum of the palace in the distance. The tension in the room was palpable. Some of the council members looked at each other uncertainly, while others seemed to agree with Zera's words. They had seen the changes in the hatchlings themselves. They couldn't ignore the intelligence and understanding the hatchlings had gained. Perhaps there was something to this new way. Empress, Thyrex spoke, his voice soft but filled with respect. I do not claim to know what the future holds, but I know this, the hatchlings are the future. We must support them in whatever path they choose, even if it means leaving behind the old ways. Zera nodded. I know. That is why I am asking you to support this change. We cannot move forward if we are afraid of the unknown. The time has come for us to embrace it. A few of the council members spoke in hushed voices, but no one dared to oppose Zera directly. She had made her decision. The bond between Kara and the hatchlings would not be broken. The Zernok Empire would grow, change, and learn from the humans, and perhaps even join them in a future of cooperation instead of domination. Very well, Empress, Kraft said, his voice cold. But know this, if this path leads to the Empire's downfall, you will be held responsible. There are many who share my concerns. I understand, Zera replied, her voice steady. But I will not lead out of fear. I will lead with vision. With that, the council meeting was adjourned. Days passed, and the news of Zera's decision spread throughout the Empire. The people were divided. Some were excited by the possibility of a new future one, where strength wasn't defined by power alone, but by the ability to understand and grow. Others were fearful. Change was always difficult, and for a people who had built their empire on centuries of tradition, the idea of emotional connections changing the course of history was too much to accept. Despite the uncertainty, Zera remained resolute. She spent more time with Kara and the hatchlings, watching as the young creatures interacted with the human child. The hatchlings had become more than just symbols of the future. They were learning, growing, and evolving into beings who could lead not just with power, but with compassion and intelligence. Kara, for her part, had no idea just how much her presence was changing the fate of the Zernok Empire. She loved the hatchlings as if they were her own, teaching them games, words, and stories from her world. And the hatchlings, in turn, adored her. They trusted her, and in that trust, they found a new kind of power, the power to lead with understanding, not fear. It was not long before the Zernok began to notice the change. The hatchlings grew faster than anyone had expected, displaying abilities that no one had thought possible for creatures of their kind. Their minds were sharp, their hearts filled with empathy, and their leadership skills seemed to emerge naturally, shaped by Kara's influence. The future of the Empire was no longer uncertain. Zera had embraced it with courage, and now the Zernok were poised to step into a new era, one of cooperation, growth, and strength through unity. As the hatchlings took their first steps as leaders, Zera stood by them, proud of the decision she had made. The Empire was changing, but in the end, Zera knew it was for the better. The future of the Zernok would not be defined by old codes, but by the love and trust they had found in each other. Regardless of species, Zera watched the hatchlings as they gathered around Kara, their scales glowing brightly in the light. She knew then that she had made the right choice. The future had arrived, and it was a future built not on fear, but on the strength of compassion. And so, the Zernok Empire began its new journey, led by the bond of a human child and the once untouchable hatchlings, who would change the galaxy forever.